So, ladies and gentlemen,
of Sparta to the modern city of Sparta, a great labor. Now, can you imagine a society in which every function is outsourced to a private contractor? In 2014, I was teaching a seminar on political leadership. My class consisted of ardent free market advocates who were staunchly opposed to any form of state intervention in the economy. During one session, I presented them with a thought-provoking case study. The Canadian government had decided to allocate funds for humanitarian health in Africa, not as a direct subsidy, but as an investment in the development for a cure of Ebola. The Canadian National Health Services, driven by this initiative, successfully developed an efficient vaccine that ultimately saved countless lives. At the time, pharmaceutical companies had shown little interest in addressing Ebola. The disease predominantly affected impoverished African nations, and the potential profit margins were deemed too low to warrant significant investment. However, in 2014, the first cases of Ebola were detected in Europe, triggering alarms among authorities and the medical community about the potential for a global pandemic. In response, the Canadian government made an anticipated decision to freely license the vaccine to the pharmaceutical industry, enabling mass production at a low cost. I then posed a question to the participants. Was this state intervention in the vaccine market justified, or was it a mistake? What would they have done differently? Despite my experience in these discussions, I was still taken aback by their unanimous response. They asserted that Canada was wrong to intervene and insisted that the market should always be left to operate freely, as it would ultimately produce the most beneficial outcome. The urgency of the situation did not sway them in the slightest. One participant explained that, in his view, even if the disease spread and claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, the pharmaceutical companies would have eventually developed a vaccine without any need to disrupt the natural flow of the market. What can we observe from this perspective? Firstly, there is a teleological belief that the market will always find the optimal solution. This belief is rooted in the notion that there exists a singular economic orthodoxy, a kind of natural law that must be respected unconditionally. In addition, we notice a disturbing relativization of human existence. Secondly, the idea that people may die is deemed less significant than preserving the health of the market. And thirdly, social consequences and the well-being of society as a whole are dismissed as inconsequential. Of course, this is not the only perspective in the world today. However, as we notice, neoliberal economics are increasingly gaining traction, particularly in contexts where any welfare policy is stigmatized as socialist. For this reason, we will now contrast this example with the principles of Sparta. To begin, it's important to place Sparta within its broader historical context. While Sparta was indeed unique, as Professor Kotios explained yesterday, it shared many common practices with other Greek city-states of the same period. Simplicity, for instance, was a value not exclusive to Sparta, though the Spartans took it to an unprecedented level, of course. It's worth noting that ancient Greece, particularly the mainland, was never known for its wealth or luxury. The most magnificent structures, such as the Acropolis of Athens, were public and did not serve as private displays of wealth. Furthermore, we must recognize that Sparta existed in a world and a civilization vastly different from our own. Therefore, we should avoid making direct comparisons or assuming that the lessons of Sparta could be directly applied to modern societies. They simply cannot. Our goal instead is to study the ideas and principles that guided the Spartans in organizing their economy, assess their effectiveness, and finally, draw conclusions that may illuminate some of the pressing challenges facing by contemporary societies. Sparta's rigid social hierarchy, communal living, and economic arrangements, including the distribution of land and the use of helos for agricultural labor, were all carefully designed to create a stable, disciplined society capable of sustaining a powerful military. This was essential for such a small population that needed to defend itself against both internal revolts, such as those of the helots, and external threats. By minimizing wealth disparities among the equals, OMI, the system reduced internal strife and distractions that could possibly undermine social cohesion. By focusing on a collective way of life and enforcing economic equality, Sparta was able to channel all its resources and energy into maintaining a disciplined and united society, which in turn supported its military or security, you name it, endeavors. The economy served the needs of the state, while the state maintained the structures that supported the economy. From an international relations perspective, which is my field, one could argue that Sparta applied a mercantilistic logic with strong intervention in the economy to achieve national wealth and power. The system emphasized collection decision-making within a select group of citizens and was controlled by powerful institutions such as the Ephors and the Elders' Council, Gerousia, both of which were elected bodies. This created a political structure that was less participatory, at least compared to that of Athens. The Spartan lawmakers' vision was to create an egalitarian society that balanced the interests of the polis and those of the citizen, harmonizing the collective and the individual. Theoretically, Spartan citizens were equal in terms of political rights and social status. While much about Sparta remains shrouded in mystery, it is reasonable to assume that there were no distinct socioeconomic classes, at least without big distinctions. Although there is no definitive evidence that gold or silver possession was outright banned for the individuals, flaunting wealth was certainly not morally acceptable. Economic disparities were downplayed through a uniform lifestyle and communal sharing of resources. Spartans dressed as simple as possible, reflecting this commitment to equality. And this emphasis on equality and austerity was foundational, reinforcing a sense of collective identity and shared duty. It was an ethos born out of necessity, given the many enemies around Sparta, representing a conscious collective effort to create a stable and secure society through strict discipline, economic equality, and focus on military excellence. Now, let's see the strengths of this model and the weaknesses. Sparta was fundamentally an agrarian society, deliberately designed to remain so, which rendered it fairly static. The Omi were prohibited from engaging in craftsmanship or commerce, allowing them to focus exclusively on their military duties. These economic activities were left to the perioiki. Citizenship now came with strict conditions. A Spartan had to undergo the rigorous state education system, agoghi, and contribute to the communal messes from the produce of their estate, klaros. There were only two ways to acquire an estate. It has been discussed already by the previous speakers, either through a grant or inheritance from a natural or adopted father. Estate sales were prohibited. The patrimony system allowed lots to be passed on to female heirs, establishing a form of life tenure. In brief, citizens in Sparta were expected to pay tribute from their estates, contribute their food to the communal messes, syssitia, and serve full-time in the military. They were also obligated to provide their own weapons and equipment as hoplites in the form of the payment, providing the payment for this equipment, and raise their children, particularly their sons, according to the strict standards set by the state. The primary right now that balanced these numerous duties was the right to participate in the ecclesia, or in other terms, appella, the citizens' assembly, and the security provided by the state. What about the weaknesses? Adherence to the city's laws and maintenance of good order, known also as evnomia, was essential. Evnomia asserted that true freedom could only be preserved under the rule of law as opposed to the chaos of tyranny or anarchy. In this respect, Sparta was not so different from other Greek city-states. Freedom required constitutional development, and it was up to the people themselves to bring it to life. As Aristotle famously said about the polis, while it comes into existence for the sake of life, it exists for the good life, meaning that one could not experience true freedom outside of it. Nevertheless, it is important to note that the Spartans were not ideal citizens or paragons of virtue, as sometimes we tend to think of them. Like any other society, they had their flaws. Bribery and the desire of good living were among them. The laws of Sparta were explicitly designed to curb these impulses, encouraging citizens to prioritize the well-being of the city-state above private endeavors. Alas, the strength of Sparta was simultaneously its weaknesses. The city underwent significant changes following its victory over Athens, what a paradox, and its transformation into a robust regional power acting in both sides of the Aegean. The pivotal moment was Agesilaus II's campaign in Asia Minor, where he defeated the Persians and brought back substantial booty to Sparta. This influx of wealth in a static agrarian society, resorting to barter to satisfy its needs, gradually eroded these strict ethics that had long defined Spartan society, leading to the abandonment of traditional customs. We can assume that material distractions had a radical impact on Sparta, because in the medium term, they were followed by emphatic defeats in battle, like in Leuctra. This decline contributed to a reduction in population, which proved to be a major weakness of the Spartan economic system. By Aristotle's time, oliganthropy had severely distressed the economy. The rich had become richer, and the poor had become poorer. Additionally, the testamentary laws and the ability of women to inherit family property concentrated significant portion of the land, around 2/5, in the hands of women, further exacerbating economic disparities and poverty. Efforts to address these issues were initiated by Agis IV during his brief reign, but it was ultimately succeeded by Cleomenes III, who applied the revolutionary egalitarian socio-economic reform. We talked about him 2 years ago in this room. Now, the challenges, now that we've talked about Sparta's strengths and weaknesses, we can contrast it with modern economy, a model fundamentally different, shaped by distinct conditions. Technological advancements, globalization, and trade have enabled for us unprecedented levels of development. However, this progress is not without deep-rooted deficiencies, which present serious challenges for the future. Today, forces beyond democratic control wield immense power capable of imposing their will on nations. International corporations, along with high technology and financial companies, have become so influential that they can sway national decision-making with dire consequences for democracy. Neoliberal economists advocate for minimal government intervention, emphasizing deregulation, privatization, and the reduction of state influence in markets. While these policies are allegedly designed to promote competition and efficiency, they also create conditions where market power becomes concentrated in the hands of a few large corporations. As a result, the market substitutes politics, and the citizen is reduced to a mere individual whose behavior is dictated by economic rules. In such a system, the market itself can become authoritarian, leading to either an impotent or an authoritarian polity. As it was explained by Colin Crouch, big economic interests have the power to influence policymakers, extending their reach into the political sphere. And while liberal theorists believe that as nations become more economically interdependent through trade, the likelihood of conflict decreases, history has shown that hard power dictates both the terms of peace and the price the weak has to pay for any arrangement. Thinkers such as Jason Brennan go one step further, rejecting even democracy. He argues that most people are uninformed and irrational about politics, like you and me, leading to poor decision-making. Brennan's critique suggests that the uninformed masses may support policies that are economically harmful or that infringe on individual rights. Similarly, someone from the past, Friedrich Hayek, had criticized majoritarian democracy, arguing that it can lead to the tyranny of the majority, where the interests of the many override the rights and freedoms of individuals. In the balance between the individual and the collective, neoliberals champion individualism. The notion of the citizen, politis, is diminished in favor of the individual as a consumer. It is what Sandel describes as the transfer from a market economy to a market society. In a minimalist state, politics exerts minimal influence over social affairs, which are instead governed by market laws. Today, our societies face a crisis of citizenship and cohesion. While democracy interlinks rights with responsibilities, neoliberal thought disconnects rights from society in the name of self-determination, where anything can be claimed as a right without an equivalent responsibility in return. In practice, what this theory suggests is to strip the citizen of political substance, leaving them defenseless against the power of market conglomerates. The consequences for the state strategy are apparent. Societies cannot prosper when they are fragmented. People need something to believe in, a common narrative, a genuine goal. Take national defense. What many states do is outsourcing their defense to professional bidders, detaching military service from civic responsibility. Once people fought for hearth and home, today strong minorities challenge even the value to resist to the aggressor. How would have Sparta survived had it applied neoliberal ideas? Let me now come to the final question. Can a society prosper in a neoliberal world? The Greek polis opened a new chapter in human history, not only because it was governed collectively, but also because of its autonomous inception. Castoriadis defines autonomy as the self-institution of society. It is where a community actively creates and governs its laws, values, and institutions through collective self-reflection and decision-making. In an autonomous society, citizens recognize themselves as the source of the law and actively participate in its creation and reform. Sparta can be seen as embracing this model of autonomy to a significant extent. The Great Ritra, traditionally attributed to Lycurgos, which outlines the constitutional structure and deliberative procedures of Sparta, centers on the interaction between three key institutions: the kings, Gerousia, and Demos. The focus on the collective good, strict social order, and shared ethos in Sparta was driven and maintained internally by the citizens themselves, rather by being imposed by external authorities or dictated by outside forces. Today we have plenty of choices, but our economic perceptions revolve around welfare and freedoms, or simply put, on consumption and individual rights. While pluralism and diversity are expected to manifest democratic principles, individualism erodes social responsibility. And economic disparities, one of its consequences, lead to isolation and fragmentation. A strong and cohesive society, one that balances the collective and the individual, can be goal-oriented in contrast to a consumption or market economy where citizenship is detached from civic virtue. Sparta's economy, as it can be seen from a broader perspective, served a higher common goal centered on the survival and security of society for centuries. It gave the collective a sense of sacred duty, inspiring its citizens a respect for the moral purposes that guarantee the perpetuation of the polis. Modern societies, especially in the European family, can learn from the Spartan example if they seek to rediscover togetherness and shared values. The legacy of Sparta reminds us today that societal cohesion, self-sufficiency, and collective conscience are vital for long-term success and stability. Spartan simplicity and collective ethos can definitely inform our efforts to address the growing challenges of living imbalances, especially when it echoes the teaching of Hilon the Spartan, one of the 7 sages of Greece, who famously advocated for a modest and harmonious way of life, encapsulated in his maxim, nothing in excess. Μηδέν άγαν. Thank you for your patience.
You're welcome.